Commander Zixatal's four eyes focused on the display screen as an alert chimed through the bridge of the Harmonious Accord. His antennae twitched with excitement. After 3 months of surveying empty space near the Korath Nebula, they had finally detected something interesting. Unknown vessel detected, Science Officer Pelmora announced, her crystalline body refracting the bridge lights into rainbow patterns. Distance 40,000 kilometers. Configuration unfamiliar. Zixatal leaned forward in his command chair, his chitinous fingers drumming against the armrest. This was what he lived for, first contact, the moment when a new species joined the great family of the Galactic Union. He had participated in 2 such events during his career, and each time had been magnificent. Begin scanning procedures, he ordered. Prepare the first contact protocols. This could be historic. The crew moved with practiced efficiency. First contact was serious business. There were rules, procedures, diplomatic ceremonies that had been refined over millions of years. Everything had to be perfect. Pelmora's voice took on a puzzled tone. Initial scans complete, Commander. The vessel appears to be using primitive fusion drives. Shielding is basic, barely adequate for deep space travel. Hull composition is simple metal alloys. This species is definitely pre-contact level. Excellent, Zixatal said, though something nagged at him. Pre-contact species usually stayed close to their home systems. What was this ship doing so far from any colonized space? Set an intercept course. Slow approach. We don't want to frighten them. As the Harmonious Accord glided closer, the main view screen flickered to life, showing the unknown vessel. Zixatal's antennae drooped in confusion. The ship was a mess. It wasn't just primitive. It looked like it had been through a war. The hull was scarred with what appeared to be meteor impacts, energy weapon burns, and stress fractures. Large sections had been patched with different colored metals that didn't match the rest of the structure. Some patches looked newer than others, creating a patchwork effect that hurt to look at. Is that Lieutenant Kreoth, the security officer, leaned closer to his screen. Is that adhesive tape on the hull? Pelmora adjusted her sensors. Confirmed. There are multiple applications of a primitive bonding material across several hull breaches. Commander, this vessel should not be spaceworthy. The structural integrity is compromised in at least 40 locations. Yet the ship moved steadily through space, its engines burning with a determination that seemed to defy the damage it had sustained. Zixatal could make out markings on the hull now. Letters in an unfamiliar script, rendered in what looked like hand-painted characters. USCV Persephone's Gambit. Open a hailing channel, he commanded. Use the standard first contact greeting. All known languages. The communications officer nodded, transmitting the carefully crafted message that had been used for thousands of years. It was a message of peace, welcome, and friendship, translated into every known language in the galaxy. For a long moment, there was silence. Then the speakers crackled to life. A cacophony of sound erupted from the unknown vessel. It was as if someone was cycling through every language transmission at once, creating a garbled mess of overlapping voices. The noise continued for several seconds before finally settling into something approximating galactic standard, though heavily accented and broken. Yeah, we read you, a rough voice said, sounding tired and annoyed. You folks with the towing service? The entire bridge of the Harmonious Accord fell silent. Zixatal looked at his communications officer, who looked back with equally confused eyes. Pelmora's crystalline form had stopped refracting light entirely, a sign of deep confusion in her species. Towing service? Zixatal repeated slowly. Yeah, the voice continued. We called for assistance about 3 days ago. Well, tried to call. Not sure if the message got through. Our comms array took a hit from some debris. Zixatal cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. This was not how first contact was supposed to go. Unknown vessel. This is Commander Zixatal of the Galactic Survey Corps representing the United Galactic Union. We are not a towing service. We are an exploratory vessel. You are the first of your species we have encountered. There was a pause. Then so. You can't help with directions? Directions? Zixatal's antennae were now completely flat against his head in confusion. Yeah, we're trying to get to the Tau Ceti colonies. Got turned around in a solar storm about 2 weeks back. This area isn't on any of our charts. You know where we are? Pelmora pulled up a star chart and began calculating. Her voice was shaky when she spoke. Commander, Tau Ceti is approximately 47 light-years from our current position. For this vessel to have traveled from there using primitive fusion drives would take centuries. Say again? The voice from the ship asked. You're breaking up. Zixatal felt a cold sensation run through his body despite his species not having the biological capacity for such feelings. Unknown vessel, please clarify. How did you arrive at this location? We jumped here, the voice said as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. FTL drive. Standard stuff. Look, I'm Captain Marcus Chen of the Persephone's Gambit. We're a mining vessel out of the Mars Consortium. We've got 40 tons of platinum iridium in our hold that's already late for delivery, and I really don't have time for... You have faster-than-light travel? Palomora interrupted, her voice cracking the crystal equivalent of shouting. Well, yeah, Chen said. How else would we get between star systems? Look, are you going to help us or not? Zixatal's mind was reeling. FTL travel. This primitive species, with their patched-together ship held together with adhesive tape, had faster-than-light travel. Most species took thousands of years to develop such technology. It required advanced understanding of physics, mathematics, and engineering. It required civilization-level cooperation and resources. We will render assistance, Zixatal managed to say. Please stand by for formal first contact procedures. Formal what now? Chen asked. Before Zixatal could respond, Pelamora's console began screaming alerts. Commander! Energy readings from the unknown vessel are spiking. Their reactor is outputting levels that should cause immediate critical failure. According to our sensors, their containment field should have collapsed hours ago. The radiation levels alone should be lethal to any biological life. Chen, Zixatal said urgently, your reactor is failing. You need to shut it down immediately. There was a sound that might have been laughter. Nah, she always reads hot. Torres keeps meaning to recalibrate the sensors, but we've been busy. Old girl runs fine. Impossible, Pelmora whispered. Zixatal stared at the battered ship on his view screen. This vessel, this crew, these humans as they called themselves, they were flying through space in a ship that violated multiple laws of physics, using technology they somehow developed on their own. And they were worried about a delivery schedule. The galaxy, Zixatal realized with growing certainty, was about to become a very different place. The docking procedure took longer than expected, because the Persephone's Gambit had 3 different docking port designs welded onto its hull, and only one of them actually worked. Captain Chen apologized over the comm, explaining something about learning as we go and budget constraints. Commander Zixatal stood at the airlock with his first contact team, mentally reviewing the protocols. They wore their formal ceremonial uniforms. They had prepared speeches in multiple languages. They carried gifts representing the finest achievements of galactic civilization. This was a moment that would be recorded in history books for millennia. The airlock hissed open. The smell hit them first. It was a mixture of machine oil, something burning, unwashed bodies, and a sharp metallic tang that made Zixatal's antennae curl. The interior of the human ship was cramped, with exposed pipes running along the ceiling and walls. Warning labels covered every surface, handwritten in messy script. A human stood in the corridor wearing stained coveralls and holding something wrapped in paper. He was chewing. You the alien guys? The human asked around a mouthful of food. Lieutenant Kreoth, who had been preparing to announce their presence formally, simply stared. Yeah, that's us, Zixatal said. Abandoning protocol. I am Commander Zixatal. We are here for formal first contact. The human nodded and pressed a button on the wall. Hey Cap, the aliens are here. Be right there. A voice called from somewhere deeper in the ship, followed by the sound of something metallic clanging. Torres, stop welding for 5 minutes, almost done. Another voice shouted back. The human in front of them took another bite of his food and gestured down the corridor. Follow me. Watch your head. And don't touch anything unless you want Sarah to yell at you. They walked through the narrow corridors of the ship. Everywhere Zixatal looked, he saw chaos. Wires were bundled together with plastic ties. Panels were held in place with actual screws instead of magnetic locks. More handwritten labels covered the walls. Do not touch, Sarah will kill you, and this pipe is hot. Yes. Still. And Jeff's lunch, labeled for a reason. They passed a room where a human was indeed welding something, bright sparks flying. She looked up, nodded at them, and went back to work. The corridor opened into a larger space that appeared to be a combination dining area and command center. 12 humans were present, most wearing the same stained coveralls. Some were eating. One was reading from a data pad. Another was repairing what looked like a power coupling right there at the table. A man in slightly cleaner coveralls approached. He was tall for a human with dark hair and tired eyes. He wiped his hand on his clothes before extending it toward Zixatal. "Marcus Chen, captain of this fine vessel," he said. "Sorry about the mess. We've been running with a skeleton crew for about 6 months." Zixatal looked at the extended hand, uncertain what to do with it. Pelmora's database chimed softly. "It is a greeting gesture," she whispered. "You are meant to grasp it." Zixatal did so, trying not to think about the grease stains. "Captain Chen, we are representatives of the Galactic Union. Your species has just made first contact with galactic civilization. This is a momentous occasion." Chen smiled, but it looked more tired than excited. "That's great, really. But can your civilization help us figure out where we are? We need to get to Tau Ceti, and our navigation system has been giving us trouble since the solar storm." "Captain Chen, do you understand what I'm saying? There is an entire galaxy of civilizations out here. Thousands of species, millions of years of history. Trade, culture, technology." "Cool," Chen interrupted. "But we have 40 tons of platinum iridium that's already 3 weeks late. Our contract has penalty clauses, so directions would be really helpful." Zixatal's antennae drooped. This was not going as planned. Pelmora stepped forward, her crystalline body chiming softly. "Captain Chen, may I examine your reactor? Our sensors indicate it is operating far outside safe parameters." "Sure," Chen said, gesturing to one of the crew. "Torres, take her down to engineering. Try not to let her touch anything that might explode." A human woman with short black hair and grease-stained hands stood up. "Follow me." "And she's right about the reactor. I've been telling you for months we need to recalibrate." "When we get paid, Torres," Chen said. "When we get paid." Pelmora followed Torres deeper into the ship. Zixatal watched them go, then turned back to Chen. "Captain, I must ask, how did your species develop faster than light travel?" Chen shrugged. "Dr. Zhao figured it out about 60 years ago. Something about folding space. I'm not a scientist. I just fly the ship, but developing FTL requires centuries of research, advanced mathematical models, testing facilities, resources that only spacefaring civilizations possess. We needed to get to other star systems," Chen said simply. "Earth was getting crowded. Mars needed supplies. The belt needed workers. So we figured it out." "You just figured it out?" "Well, there was a lot of trial and error," Chen admitted. "Lost a few ships in the early days. But eventually we got it working well enough." "Well enough." Kriatha spoke for the first time, his reptilian features showing confusion. "Yeah, I mean, it's not perfect. The drives burn out if you push them too hard. Sometimes the jump calculations are off by a few million kilometers, and you definitely don't want to jump too close to a gravity well. But it gets us where we need to go." From deeper in the ship, they heard Pelmora's voice, high-pitched and distressed. "This is impossible. You have bypassed 17 safety systems. The containment field is held in place by what appears to be wires. How is everyone on this ship not dead?" Torres's voice carried back clearly. "Containment field works fine. The wires are just backup." "Well, backup for the backup. The actual backup failed about a year ago." "A year?" Pelmora sounded faint. Zixatal looked at Captain Chen, who was calmly eating something from a wrapper. "Your reactor has been operating in a failed state for a year?" "We keep meaning to fix it properly," Chen said. "But parts are expensive and we've had good runs. Figured we could wait until our next port. You are flying through deep space with a reactor that could fail at any moment?" Chen looked genuinely puzzled. "It hasn't failed yet." Before Zixatal could respond, alarms began blaring. The lights in the room flickered red. One of the human crew members looked at a display screen and cursed. "Cap, we've got company," the crew member said. "Looks like a Croatian raider." Zixatal felt his blood run cold. The Croatians were pirates well known in this sector. They were aggressive, well-armed, and they specifically targeted Survey Corps vessels because they knew such ships couldn't fight back. "All crew, this is Commander Zixatal," he said into his communicator. "Croatian raider detected. Begin evacuation protocols. We must retreat and call for military support." Chen set down his food and walked to the display screen. He studied it for a moment, then looked at Zixatal. "You're leaving? We are not a military vessel. We cannot fight. You and your crew should evacuate to our ship." "We can outrun them." Chen looked at his crew. Several of them were shaking their heads. "Thanks for the offer," Chen said slowly. "But we're not leaving our ship. Or our cargo. Captain, you don't understand. The Croatians will destroy your vessel and take everything you have." Chen smiled, but this time there was no warmth in it. "Let them try." Commander Zixatal watched in growing horror as Captain Chen calmly walked to what appeared to be a communication panel held together with tape and determination. The red alert lights continued flashing across the human ship, but none of the crew seemed particularly concerned. One of them was still eating. "Torres, get up here," Chen said into the panel. "We've got pirates." "Again?" Torres's voice crackled back. "That's the third time this month." "Third time?" Zixatal's antennae were completely flat. "You encounter pirates regularly?" "It's the platinum iridium," one of the human crew members explained, not looking up from his datapad. "Word gets around when you're hauling valuable cargo." Pellamora emerged from the lower decks, her crystalline form pulsing with agitation. "Commander, we must leave immediately. This vessel cannot sustain combat." "The reactor alone?" "Yeah, about that," Torres interrupted, following behind her. "I've been thinking. If we reroute power from life support to the forward shields, we could boost our defensive capacity by maybe 30%. "You cannot reroute power from life support." Pellamora's voice hit a pitch that made several humans wince. "Your crew will suffocate." "Not immediately," Torres said. "We've got at least 20 minutes of air. Maybe 30 if everyone breathes shallow." Zixatal looked at Chen. "Captain, please. The Croatians are a known threat. They have military-grade weapons. Your ship is barely functional. My crew is preparing to evacuate. You should come with us. We can outrun them." Chen pulled up a display showing the approaching Croatian vessel. It was larger than both the Harmonious Accord and the Persephone's Gambit combined, bristling with weapon arrays. "What kind of weapons does your ship have?" Chen asked. "We have defensive shields," Zixatal said. "We are explorers, not warriors." "What about offensive capabilities?" "We have none. We are not designed for combat." Chen nodded slowly, then looked at Torres. "What about offensive shields?" Torres grinned. "That's not really a thing, Cap. Could we make it a thing?" Torres and Chen looked at each other for a long moment. Something passed between them, some shared understanding that Zixatal could not comprehend. "Probably blow out half our systems," Torres said. "But would it work? Maybe 50-50 chance we all die." "I'll take those odds. Wait," Zixatal shouted. "You cannot possibly be considering—" The communication system crackled. A harsh grating voice filled the room, speaking in Galactic Standard. "Unknown vessels. This is War Leader Krath of the Croatian Empire. You will surrender your cargo and power down your engines. Compliance will result in your survival. Resistance will not." The bridge of the Persephone's Gambit fell silent. The humans all looked at Chen. Chen picked up the communicator. "War Leader Krath, this is Captain Marcus Chen of the USCV Persephone's Gambit. Our cargo is not available. Our engines will remain operational. If you want our platinum iridium, you can pry it from our cold." "Dead hands," he paused, then added. "And buddy, we didn't survive the Mars Rebellion just to get pushed around by pirates in fancy ships." Zixatal had no idea what the Mars Rebellion was, but the effect on the human crew was immediate. They all straightened, their tired expressions replaced with something harder. "Something dangerous. 30 seconds to weapons range," one of the crew called out. "Torres, work your magic," Chen said. Everyone else, battle stations. "And someone get our guests to a safe location." "There is no safe location on this ship," Pellamora wailed. "Fair point," Chen admitted. "Might want to brace yourselves then." The Croatian ship opened fire. Energy beams lanced through space, striking the Persephone's Gambit shields. The entire ship shuddered. Lights flickered. Something exploded in the lower decks. "Shields at 60%. A crew member called out. "Returning fire," another announced. Zixatal watched as the humans launched what appeared to be mining charges at the Croatian vessel. The charges were never designed for combat. They moved slowly, tumbling through space without guidance systems. The Croatians destroyed them easily. "Well, that didn't work," Chen said calmly. "Torres?" "Almost there. Just need to reverse the polarity on the shield generators, crosswire the power couplings, and pray to whatever gods are listening." "Do we have gods?" one of the crew asked. "Several," another replied. "Praying to all of them." The Croatian ship fired again. This time, multiple beams converged on the Persephone's Gambit. The shields held, but barely. Shields at 30%. Torres? Done. Activating in 3, 2, 1. The ship lurched sideways. Zixatal grabbed onto a support beam as gravity seemed to shift. Every light on the bridge went out, then came back in a different color. The air tasted like copper. On the view screen he saw something impossible. The Persephone's Gambit's shields had somehow extended outward, forming a pulsing bubble of energy. The bubble touched the Croatian ship. Every electrical system on the Croatian vessel went dark. Electromagnetic pulse, Torres explained, her voice strained. Overloaded our shields to create a massive burst. Fried their systems. You just turned defensive shields into a weapon, Pelmora whispered. Yeah, Torres said. Told you it wasn't really a thing, but now it is. The Persephone's Gambit shuddered again, but this time from internal damage. Alarms were blaring from multiple stations. Shields are completely down, a crew member reported. And the EMP knocked out half our systems, too. Can we still maneuver? Chen asked. Barely. Good enough. Take us closer to them. Closer? Kreoth finally spoke, his reptilian features showing pure confusion. Why would you move closer to an enemy vessel? Because, Chen said, pulling up what looked like a manual control stick. We still have our mining charges, and if we can't shoot them accurately, we'll just have to deliver them personally. The Persephone's Gambit limped forward, its engines sputtering. The Croatian ship was dead in space, its crew presumably scrambling to restore power. Launching charges. Now. This time the mining charges weren't launched from a distance. They were released directly next to the Croatian hull, magnetic clamps securing them in place. Detonation in 10 seconds, Torres said. Everyone brace. The explosions ripped through the Croatian ship's hull. Not enough to destroy it, but enough to disable engines and weapons. The pirate vessel began venting atmosphere. Victory. Against all odds, against all logic, the humans had won. Then the lights on the Persephone's Gambit went out completely. The hum of the reactor died. Emergency lighting failed to activate. Torres? Chen's voice in the darkness. Reactor's dead, Cap. That EMP trick used everything we had. We're floating dead in space. Through the view screen, illuminated only by distant stars, Zixatal could see the Croatian ship's lights flickering back on. Their systems were rebooting, and the Persephone's Gambit had nothing left. The darkness inside the Persephone's Gambit was absolute. Commander Zixatal could hear the humans moving in the blackness, their breathing steady despite the dire situation. Emergency lighting should have activated. It had not. Life support should have switched to backup power. It had not. By all rights, everyone aboard should be panicking. Flashlights, Captain Chen said calmly. Small beams of light clicked on around the bridge. The humans had been prepared for this. Of course they had. Status? Chen asked. Main reactor is completely offline. Torres's voice came from near the engineering station. Backup battery is at 3%. Not enough to restart the reactor. FTL drive is fried. Conventional engines are non-responsive. We've got maybe 15 minutes of air, then we're breathing vacuum. Through the view screen, the Croatian vessel's lights were growing brighter as their systems came back online. Their engines flickered to life. They will destroy us, Pelmora said quietly. This time they will finish the job. Probably, Chen agreed. Torres options? Working on it, Zixatal's communicator chimed. Commander, this is the Harmonious Accord. We are reading catastrophic system failures on the human vessel. We can evacuate them, but we must do so in the next 8 minutes before the Croatians regain weapons capability. Zixatal looked at Chen, whose face was illuminated by a flashlight held under his chin. Captain, there is no shame in retreat. You fought bravely. Your crew deserves to survive. Deserving and getting are two different things, Chen said. Torres? Still working on it. Work faster. Zixatal watched as Torres moved through the darkened ship with her flashlight, heading toward the lower decks. Other crew members were moving too, but not toward the airlock where they could evacuate. They were moving deeper into the ship. What are they doing? Kreoth asked. Probably something stupid, Chen said, but his voice held pride rather than concern. The Harmonious Accord sensors suddenly screamed alerts. Commander! His science officer's voice came over the comm. We're detecting movement outside the human vessel. Multiple human life signs in vacuum. What? Zixatal pulled up the external view on his datapad. What he saw made no sense. Humans in spacesuits were floating outside the Persephone's Gambit. They were pushing cargo containers. large metal containers filled with platinum iridium. They were pushing them toward the Croatian ship. "They're using the cargo as weapons," Pelmora whispered. "They're turning their delivery into improvised space mines." Each container had mining charges attached to it. The humans were manually guiding them through space, using their suit thrusters to aim. It was insane. It was impossible. It was the most primitive combat tactic Zixatal had ever witnessed, and the Croatians had not expected it. The pirate ship's targeting systems locked onto the containers. They fired, destroying 2 of them. The explosions were massive, the valuable platinum iridium vaporizing instantly. "They just destroyed millions of credits worth of cargo," one of Chen's crew members said. "Better than letting pirates have it," Chen replied. But 3 containers got through. They impacted the Croatian hull, and the mining charges detonated. The explosions tore through the pirate ship's engine section. The vessel went dark again, this time with visible hull breaches venting atmosphere. The humans outside began making their way back to their ship, moving calmly through the vacuum as if this was routine. 5 minutes of air remaining, someone announced. "Torres?" Chen's voice was still calm. "Almost there." Zixatal could not understand. The reactor was dead. The batteries were empty. What could Torres possibly do? The laws of physics were absolute. Without power, the ship was a floating tomb. Then he heard it, a sound that should not exist. The clang of metal on metal. Tools being used, in the darkness, with no power. Torres emerged back onto the bridge, her coveralls even dirtier than before. She was carrying something that looked like it had been torn from the wall. Wires dangled from it. "Everyone hold on to something," she said. "Torres, what did you do?" Chen asked. "Something really stupid," she said, then grinned. "I bypassed the safety protocols." "Which ones?" "All of them. All of them?" "Every single one. Then I cross-wired the backup battery directly to the FTL drive." Pelmora made a sound like breaking glass. "That will kill everyone. The FTL drive requires massive amounts of power to activate. 3% battery can't possibly, shouldn't work, violates physics, yeah, Torres interrupted. "I've been hearing that my whole life." "Watch this," she pressed something. Nothing happened for a moment. Then the ship began to vibrate. A low hum built in intensity, growing louder and louder until Zixatal's antennae hurt from the sound. "FTL drive activating," Torres announced. "But we don't have enough power for a full jump. So instead we're doing a micro jump, too small for actual travel, just enough to create a field pulse." "That is not how FTL drives work," Pelmora shouted. "Tell that to the drive," Torres said and pressed another button. Reality bent. Zixatal felt it in his bones, in his mind, in the very fabric of his being. Space-time folded around the ship for just a fraction of a second. The FTL field activated and immediately collapsed, unable to sustain itself with so little power. But the collapse created a shockwave. The wave expanded outward from the Persephone's gambit in all directions. It hit the Croatian ship, which was already damaged, already drifting. The wave sent it tumbling away end over end, its crew certainly unconscious from the gravitational distortion. The wave also hit the harmonious accord, but at a greater distance. Zixatal's ship rocked, alarms blaring but held together. Then, impossibly, the Persephone's gambit's lights came back on. Weak, flickering, but on. The reactor hummed to life with a sound like a cough. "See?" Torres said. "Told you it would work." "How?" Pelmora's voice was barely a whisper. The reactor was completely dead. The battery was empty. You used what little power remained to activate the FTL drive. There was nothing left. Torres shrugged. The micro-jump generated a feedback pulse. I routed it back into the reactor core. Sort of like jump-starting a car engine. That is not possible. You cannot create energy from nothing. You cannot restart a reactor with a feedback pulse from a system that has no power. "And yet," Chen said, gesturing at the functioning lights, "here we are." Zixatal's communicator was exploding with messages from his crew. Questions, demands for explanations, medical officers asking if he had suffered head trauma. His science officer's voice cut through. "Commander, I am reviewing the sensor data. What the humans just did violates at least 4 fundamental laws of physics. Their FTL drive should not have activated. The micro-jump should not have generated a shockwave. The feedback pulse should not have restarted the reactor. None of this should have worked. But it did work," Zixatal said quietly. "Yes, Commander, it did work." Chen stood up, stretching. "Well, that was exciting." Torres, how long until we have full power?
6, maybe 7 hours.
We need to patch about 40 new problems before we can jump to FTL again. Good enough. We're already late anyway. He turned to Zixatal. Thanks for the assist. And sorry about the cargo containers. Our boss is going to be pissed about the lost revenue. Zixatal could not speak. His mind was trying to process what he had just witnessed. Humans did not ask if something was possible. They simply did it, and when physics said no, they found a way to make physics say yes. These creatures from Earth, this species that held their ships together with tape and determination, had just shown the galaxy something terrifying. The power of not knowing something was impossible. The Galactic Union military fleet arrived 6 hours later, appearing from FTL in a coordinated formation that would have been impressive if anyone aboard the Persephone's Gambit had been paying attention. They were not. Most of the crew was sleeping, exhausted from the battle and repairs. Captain Chen was drinking something called coffee, which he had offered to Zixatal. The commander had politely declined after seeing its effect on human crew members. 12 military vessels surrounded both the Harmonious Accord and the human ship. The largest vessel, a battlecruiser called the Righteous Purpose, took position directly in front of the Persephone's Gambit. Its weapons were powered but not aimed. A warning posture, Admiral Corson's face appeared on the main view screen. He was a Vexnari, a species known for military precision and rigid adherence to protocol. His 3 eyes studied the human vessel with obvious skepticism. This is Admiral Corson of the Galactic Union Defense Fleet. Commander Zixatal, we received your distress signal. Please report on the situation. Zixatal, who had spent the past 6 hours trying to write a coherent report and failing repeatedly, took a deep breath. Admiral, we have encountered a new species. They call themselves humans. They are from a planet called Earth, and they have complicated matters. Complicated? Corson's eyes narrowed. How explain? They defeated a Croatian raider vessel, without military training, using mining equipment and improvisation. The Admiral's face showed no emotion. Commander, the Croatians are known pirates with military-grade weaponry. Are you suggesting a pre-contact species defeated them? Not pre-contact, Admiral. They have FTL travel. They developed it themselves. All 3 of Corson's eyes widened. Impossible. That word keeps coming up, Chen muttered into his coffee cup. The Admiral noticed Chen for the first time. You are human? Captain Marcus Chen, Chen said, setting down his cup. And yeah, I'm human. We all are on this ship. Well, except for our guests. Captain Chen, I am reviewing the sensor logs from this encounter. Captain Steve Monroe stood on the bridge of the USS Dauntless. The large view screen showed the vast emptiness of space. Stars twinkled in the distance, but Steve wasn't looking at them. His eyes were fixed on the tactical display showing a red cluster at the edge of the solar system. How long until they reach Mars orbit? Steve asked. Lieutenant Olivia Grant looked up from her station. 6 hours, Captain. Their ships are moving faster than we expected. Steve nodded and walked to the center of the bridge. 15 years had passed since humans first met the aliens known as the Zekthari. That meeting ended badly. The aliens destroyed 3 human ships without warning. They said humans were too weak to deserve respect. Since that day, Earth had changed. Countries that once fought each other now work together. The United Earth Defense Force combined the best soldiers, scientists, and ships from all nations. Steve had been there from the start. Captain Admiral Porter is calling from Lunar Base, said Communications Officer Frank Rodriguez. The main screen changed to show Admiral Ellen Porter's face. Her gray hair was pulled back tightly, and deep lines marked her face from years of stress. Captain Monroe, is the Dauntless ready? She asked. Yes, Admiral. All systems are at full capacity, and the special weapons are loaded, Steve replied. Good. The Zekthari fleet is larger than our last report showed. We count over 300 warships. We only have 42. Steve kept his face calm, but inside he felt a twist of worry. The Zekthari ships were bigger and had stronger weapons. By all normal measures, Earth should lose this fight. But humans weren't fighting a normal war. Dr. Wright's technology is ready, Admiral. If it works as planned, their numbers won't matter, Steve said. Admiral Porter nodded. It has to work. Earth is counting on you, Captain. The call ended, and Steve turned to find Dr. Karen Wright standing behind him. She was in her 50s, with short brown hair and tired eyes. For 10 years, she had worked to create the weapon that might save humanity. "Are you sure about this, Doctor?" Steve asked quietly. Karen's hands shook slightly as she held her tablet. "The simulations all worked perfectly. The quantum displacement field should let our torpedoes pass right through their shields, but..." She paused. "We've never used it against real Zekthari technology." Steve put a hand on her shoulder. "Science is always about the unknown. Now we find out if you're right." "Captain," called out Sensor Officer Matt Brown, "the alien fleet has increased speed. New arrival time is 4 hours. Steve walked back to his chair and pressed the ship-wide communication button. "All crew, this is Captain Monroe. In 4 hours, we face the enemy that has threatened Earth for 15 years. They think they know what humans can do. They think they are stronger than us. Today we prove them wrong." He looked around the bridge at his crew. They were the best Earth had to offer. People from different countries, backgrounds, and beliefs, all united against a common enemy. "Get some rest if you can," Steve told them. "The next shift starts in 30 minutes. I want everyone fresh when the fighting starts." As some crew members left for their short break, Steve went to his private room just off the bridge. On his desk sat a small picture frame. It showed a woman with blonde hair and a bright smile. Susan Monroe had been on one of the first ships the Zekthari destroyed. "Today's the day, Susan," Steve whispered to the picture. "We finally have a real chance." A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Dr. Wright stood there looking troubled. "Captain, I need to tell you something," she said. "The quantum displacement technology, there's a small chance it could have an unexpected reaction with their shield systems." "What kind of reaction?" Steve asked. "A very big explosion. If their shields operate on the frequency our tests couldn't detect, our ships might not survive being close to the targets when the torpedoes activate." Steve looked at her for a long moment. "Can we adjust for that?" Karen shook her head. "Not without more data on their shields. We'll only get that data when we fire the first torpedoes." "Then we make sure our first strikes count," Steve said. "And we keep our distance until we know it's safe." The ship's alarm suddenly blared. Lieutenant Grant's voice came through the speaker. "Captain, to the bridge. The Zekthari fleet has jumped forward. They're already passing Neptune." Steve rushed back to the bridge with Dr. Wright behind him. The tactical display now showed the enemy fleet much closer than before. "How is this possible?" Steve demanded. "They must have a new drive technology," said Chief Engineer Paul Martinez. "They've cut their travel time by 2/3. Steve felt cold fear in his stomach, but his voice remained steady. "Send the alert to all Earth forces. Launch fighters and prepare defense stations. The battle begins now." The USS Dauntless hummed as its engines powered up to full. Across the solar system, other human ships moved into position. On the lunar base, Admiral Porter ordered all planetary defenses activated. Through the view screen, Steve watched as the first wave of human fighters launched. Lieutenant Jack Nelson led them, a brave pilot from Iowa who had volunteered for this dangerous mission. "All ships, this is Captain Monroe of the USS Dauntless. The enemy has changed their timeline. Operation Thunderstrike begins immediately. Phase 1 fighters, you are cleared to engage." As the small human fighters flew toward the massive alien ships, Steve felt the weight of 15 years of preparation on his shoulders. Everything depended on what happened in the next few minutes. Dr. Wright stood beside him, watching the tactical display with wide eyes. "Those fighters are carrying my technology," she whispered. "All those pilots." Steve nodded grimly. "They know the risk. We all do." The human fighters looked tiny against the enormous Zekthari warships. The alien vessels opened fire, energy beams cutting through space. Some fighters exploded, but others kept going, flying straight at the enemy shields. Everyone on the bridge held their breath as the first fighters reached the alien ships. Instead of exploding against the shields, they seemed to vanish. For 3 long seconds, nothing happened. Then suddenly explosions erupted inside the largest alien ships. Systems failed, lights went out, and some Zekthari vessels began to drift. "It worked," Dr. Wright said in amazement. "The quantum displacement field let them pass through the shields." Cheers erupted across the bridge. Even Steve allowed himself a small smile. The human fighters hadn't been destroyed. They had phase shifted through the alien shields and delivered their torpedoes directly to the most vulnerable parts of the enemy ships. The Zekthari, who had thought themselves invincible behind their advanced shield technology, found themselves exposed and vulnerable. The battle had just begun, but the first strike had proven what humans had hoped for 15 years. The aliens could be beaten. "All ships," Steve commanded, "advance and engage. Humanity fights back today." High Commander Ruxvan of the Zekthari Imperium stood on the command deck of his massive flagship. His gray skin wrinkled in confusion as reports came in from across his fleet. 3 of his largest ships had suddenly lost power. Internal explosions damaged critical systems. None of it made sense. "How did the humans get through our shields?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. His science officer trembled. "Unknown, High Commander. Their fighters seemed to disappear when they reached our shields. Then explosions happened inside our ships." Ruxvan slammed his fist down. The Zekthari had conquered 17 species across 3 galactic sectors. No one had ever broken through their shield technology. These humans were supposed to be primitive and weak. "Target their main vessels," he ordered. "Launch all fighter drones. Overwhelm them with numbers." Back on the USS Dauntless, Captain Steve Monroe watched as thousands of small alien fighter drones poured out from the Zekthari ships. The first phase of their attack had worked, but the enemy was adapting quickly. "They're changing tactics," Steve said. "Lieutenant Grant, what's the status on our second wave?" Olivia looked up from her station. "Second wave is ready, Captain. Lieutenant Lisa Chen is leading them. But those drones will reach us before they can reach the enemy ships." Steve nodded grimly. "Then we need to give them a path. Contact Chief Martinez in engineering." The face of Paul Martinez appeared on a side screen. Sweat dripped down his forehead as he worked among the hot engines. "The quantum displacement generators are overheating, Captain," Paul reported. "They weren't designed for continuous use." "We need more time, Chief," Steve said. "Can you give us another 30 minutes? Paul wiped his face. "Maybe. If we redirect cooling systems from the lower decks. But that means those areas will get very hot, very fast." "Do it," Steve ordered. "And get ready for a power surge. We're about to do something unexpected." Steve turned to Dr. Wright, who was studying the enemy patterns on the tactical display. "Doctor, if we channel extra power to the main deflector dish, could we create a quantum displacement field large enough to cover the Dauntless itself?" Karen's eyes widened. "You want to phase shift the entire ship? That's never been tested. The calculations alone would take—" "No time for perfect," Steve interrupted. "Can we do it?" Karen hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, but the field would only last about 20 seconds before burning out the system, and we'd be blind while inside it. 20 seconds is all we need." Steve turned to the helm. "Ensign Joe Miller, plot a course straight through the center of the enemy formation. Full speed." The bridge went silent. Everyone understood what that meant. They would be flying directly into the heart of the enemy fleet. "Sir?" Ensign Miller questioned. "You heard me, Ensign. The closer we get, the less time they have to react to our weapons. And if we're phase shifted, their weapons can't hurt us." Steve opened a channel to the entire fleet. "All human vessels, this is Captain Monroe. The USS Dauntless will create a gap in the enemy formation. Second wave fighters follow in our wake. All other ships prepare to advance once we break their line. In Ne, the fighter launch bay of the Dauntless, Lieutenant Lisa Chen finished her pre-flight checks. Her squadron of 12 pilots listened as the captain's message came through. Lisa had lost her parents when the Zekthari destroyed Shanghai 15 years ago. Today she would finally strike back. "You heard the captain," she told her pilots. "We launch as soon as the Dauntless makes its move. Stay in formation behind them until they create the gap, then split up and hit as many targets as you can." Back on the bridge, Steve watched as the enemy drone fighters drew closer. They had only minutes before the drones would reach them. "All hands brace for high-speed maneuver," Steve announced shipwide. "Dr. Wright, start the quantum displacement field on my mark." Karen's fingers flew across her control panel. Engineering reported ready, though Chief Martinez warned that the ship would take heavy strain from the maneuver. Helm set course directly at the Zekthari command vessels. Maximum speed. Steve gripped the arms of his chair. Dr. Wright. Mark. Karen activated the field. A strange blue glow surrounded the USS Dauntless. The stars outside seemed to blur and shift colors. A low hum vibrated through the entire ship. Field is stable, Karen called out. 19 seconds remaining. Helm now, Steve ordered. The Dauntless shot forward straight toward the wall of enemy drones. The crew held their breath as the ship headed for what looked like certain destruction. But instead of crashing into the drones, the Dauntless passed through them like they weren't there. The phase-shifted ship became partially out of sync with normal space, allowing it to pass through solid objects. On his flagship, High Commander Rux Vaughn watched in shock as the human vessel appeared to phase through his drone screen and continue accelerating toward his command ships. Impossible, he roared. Increase shield power. Fire all weapons. Energy beams from the Zekthari ships passed harmlessly through the phase-shifted Dauntless. The human ship continued on its direct course. 10 seconds of field remaining. Karen called out on the Dauntless bridge. Prepare all weapons, Steve ordered. Target their command vessels. Lieutenant Grant, signal the second wave to launch now. Behind the Dauntless, Lieutenant Chen led her fighters through the gap created in the enemy formation. The Zekthari were focused on the impossible sight of the Dauntless passing through their defenses, giving the fighters precious seconds to approach unnoticed. 5 seconds, Karen warned. Fire all weapons as soon as we revert to normal space, Steve commanded. Helm, prepare for evasive maneuvers. The blue glow around the Dauntless intensified, then suddenly winked out. The ship returned to normal space in the middle of the Zekthari formation, surrounded by enormous enemy vessels. Fire! Steve shouted. The Dauntless unleashed its full arsenal. Traditional weapons struck the enemy ships from close range, while special quantum displacement torpedoes passed through their shields to detonate inside. At such close range, the aliens had no time to react. At the same moment, Lieutenant Chen's fighters arrived, each launching their own QD torpedoes at different targets. Explosions bloomed across the Zekthari fleet as ships lost power, weapons, and propulsion. High Commander Rux Vaughn stumbled as his flagship shuddered from internal explosions. How are they doing this? He demanded. No species has ever... His words were cut off as the bridge lost power. Emergency lights flickered on, revealing the fear on the faces of his crew. For the first time in the history of their empire, the Zekthari were losing a battle. The remaining human ships advanced following the path the Dauntless had created. They fired their weapons at the now vulnerable enemy vessels. On the Dauntless, Steve watched the tactical display as the battle shifted in humanity's favor. Send the signal to Admiral Porter, he ordered. Phase 2 is complete. The enemy fleet is divided and vulnerable. From the lunar base, Admiral Porter smiled at the message. She opened a channel to all Earth forces. All ships and stations, this is Admiral Porter. The enemy fleet has been broken. Press the advantage. Today we show the galaxy that humanity will not fall. Chief Engineer Paul Martinez worked frantically in the engine room of the USS Dauntless. The quantum displacement generators glowed an angry red. Warning alarms blared as temperature levels rose far beyond safe limits. We need more coolant, too. Sector 3, Paul shouted to his team. If those generators blow, we lose our advantage. The ship shook as enemy fire finally found its mark. The Dauntless had returned to normal space in the middle of the Zekthari fleet, and while many enemy ships were damaged, others were still fighting. Paul grabbed a cooling rod and inserted it manually into an overheating connection. The metal scorched his hands through his gloves, but he held it steady. His father had been a mechanic in Mexico City before the aliens attacked Earth. Paul had learned from him that sometimes machines needed a human touch to keep working. Captain, this is engineering, Paul called through the comm system. The QD generators are at critical levels. We can't phase shift again without a full cooldown cycle. On the bridge, Captain Steve Monroe acknowledged the report. Understood, Chief. Keep those weapon systems online as long as you can. Steve turned to watch the tactical display. The human fleet had broken through the enemy's defensive line. Smaller human ships darted between the massive alien vessels, firing their phase-shifting torpedoes at critical systems. The Zekthari, ships designed to fight at long range behind powerful shields, struggled against enemies that could bypass those shields completely. Lieutenant Grant, what's the status of Lieutenant Chen's fighter squadron? Steve asked. Olivia checked her screens. 8 fighters still operational, sir. They've disabled 14 enemy vessels so far. Steve nodded. The human fighters were taking losses, but they were causing massive damage to the enemy fleet. Doctor, Karen Wright stood nearby watching the battle unfold. Her invention was changing the face of space combat forever. They're adapting, Karen said suddenly, pointing to a group of enemy ships. Look at those engine signatures. Steve saw it too. Several Zekthari vessels were changing their shield frequencies, attempting to counter the quantum displacement technology. They're scanning us, trying to figure out how our system works, Karen explained. It won't take them long to develop a defense. Steve pressed the ship-wide communication button. All weapons teams, this is the captain. The enemy is adapting to our technology. Switch to targeting pattern Delta. Focus on their sensor arrays and communication systems. If they can't share data, they can't adapt as quickly. In her fighter, Lieutenant Lisa Chen received the new orders. Her small craft shook as a near miss from an enemy weapon heated her hull to dangerous levels. You heard the captain, she told her remaining pilots. New targets, hit their eyes and ears. Lisa banked her fighter sharply, diving toward a Zekthari cruiser. Its sleek curved hull was covered in sensor dishes and communication equipment. She locked onto a main sensor cluster and fired her last QD torpedo. The weapon passed through the enemy shields and detonated directly against the sensor array. The explosion wasn't large, but it didn't need to be. The delicate equipment shattered, blinding that section of the alien ship. Across the battlefield, other human fighters and ships followed the same strategy. One by one, the Zekthari vessels lost their ability to communicate with each other. Instead of a coordinated fleet, they became individual ships fighting alone. On his damaged flagship, High Commander Rux Vaughn struggled to understand what was happening. Half his bridge crew was dead. Most systems were offline. The few working screens showed his mighty fleet being taken apart piece by piece. Send the retreat signal, he ordered finally. Pull back to defensive position Alpha. His communications officer looked up with fear in his eyes. Sir, communications are down. We can't contact the other ships. For the first time in his long military career, Rux Vaughn felt true fear. The humans weren't just winning. They were systematically dismantling his fleet's ability to function as a unit. It was a strategy he had never encountered before. Prepare my personal shuttle, he ordered. The flagship is lost. Back on the lunar base, Admiral Ellen Porter watched the battle with growing hope. The tactical display showed more and more enemy ships losing power or drifting out of formation. Signal all Earth defense stations, she told her staff. Launch the reserve fighters. It's time to push them back completely. Fresh squadrons of human fighters launched from bases on the Moon, Mars, and from hidden stations in the asteroid belt. These pilots had been held in reserve, waiting for this moment. They flew toward the battle, weapons ready. On the USS Dauntless, Steve received word of the reinforcements. Perfect timing, he said. Our QD weapons are almost depleted. Dr. Wright had been analyzing the enemy's attempts to counter their technology. Captain, I've detected 3 Zekthari ships that have modified their shields. Our torpedoes won't work on them anymore. Steve studied the tactical display. Those must be their newest vessels. They've figured it out faster than we expected. Opened a channel to Admiral Porter. Admiral, we've identified 3 enemy ships that have adapted to our QD technology. Sending you their locations now. Porter's face appeared on screen. Received, Captain. I'm directing our conventional forces to focus fire on those vessels. Even if they can stop your special weapons, they can't stop everything we have. As if, to emphasize her point, a massive beam of energy shot out from the lunar defense station. The concentrated power struck one of the adapted Zekthari ships. The alien vessel's shields flared bright blue as they absorbed the impact. For a moment it seemed the shields would hold. Then, overtaxed by the enormous energy, they collapsed. A second beam hit the unprotected ship, cutting it in half. Steve allowed himself a small smile. Sometimes the old ways still work best. The battle was turning decisively in humanity's favor. More Zekthari ships were attempting to retreat, but with their formation broken and many engines damaged, they could not escape quickly enough. Human vessels surrounded them, firing constantly. Communications officer Frank Rodriguez suddenly called out from his station. "Captain, I'm picking up transmissions from the enemy fleet. They're sending out a distress signal." "Can you translate it?" Steve asked. Frank worked at his console for a moment. "Rough translation. Urgent to Imperial. High Command. Human weapons bypass all defenses. Fleet suffering severe losses. Request immediate reinforcement. Humans are not as primitive as believed." A cheer went up from the bridge crew. After 15 years of fear and preparation, they were proving that humanity could not only fight back but win. Dr. Wright moved to stand beside Steve's chair. "We did it," she said quietly. "My theory worked." Steve nodded. "And you've changed warfare forever. No species will underestimate humanity again." His view screen, Steve watched as more enemy ships lost power or began to drift. Some were attempting to surrender, powering down weapons and sending out white light signals universally recognized as submission. Steve opened a channel to all human forces. "This is Captain Monroe. The enemy fleet is breaking. Victory is within our grasp. Remember our fallen and finish this fight." As human ships pressed their advantage, the once mighty Zekthari invasion force continued to crumble. The stars themselves seemed to witness a turning point in galactic history. The day humanity announced its place among the spacefaring species not as victims but as victors. 3 hours after the battle began, the remains of the Zekthari fleet scattered across space. What had started as an organized invasion force of over 300 warships was now reduced to less than 50 damaged vessels trying to escape. On the lunar base, Admiral Ellen Porter met with Earth's Defense Council via secure video link. Her uniform was wrinkled from the long hours, but her eyes shined with victory. "The enemy is retreating beyond Neptune's orbit," she reported. "Our forces are in pursuit but maintaining safe distance. We don't want to push them into a desperate last stand." The council members nodded in agreement. The president of the United Earth Alliance, Maria Gonzalez, leaned forward on her screen. "What about casualties? How many did we lose?" she asked. "Admiral." Porter's expression grew more somber. 23 fighters destroyed, 4 capital ships heavily damaged. The USS Sacramento was lost with all hands when they intercepted a suicide run by one of the larger enemy vessels. A moment of silence followed as everyone absorbed the news. The losses were painful, but remarkably small compared to what they had feared before the battle. "And High Commander Ruxvan?" asked General Sam Peters of the Earth Defense Force. "His flagship was disabled, but a small shuttle escaped," Porter answered. "Our fighters were too busy with larger threats to intercept it. We believe he's retreating with the remainder of his fleet." President Gonzalez considered this information. "So their commander survived to tell his empire about our new technology. Will this give them time to develop countermeasures before they return?" Dr. Karen Wright had joined the meeting from the USS Dauntless. She spoke up now. "Madam President, they already started adapting during the battle. 3 of their newest ships managed to modify their shields to block our phase shift torpedoes. Given time, they'll likely develop full countermeasures. Then we must prepare for their return," President Gonzalez decided. "But today, Earth has won its first major victory against the Zekthari. Let's make sure the world knows it." Aboard the USS Dauntless, Captain Steve Monroe walked through the ship's corridors, checking on his crew. Despite the victory, there was damage to repair and wounded to care for. The medical bay was full, with doctors and nurses working tirelessly to treat the injured. Steve stopped by a bed where young Ensign Joe Miller lay with bandages covering burns on his arms. The ensign had been injured when his console exploded during the battle. "How are you feeling, Ensign?" Steve asked. Joe tried to sit up, but Steve gently pushed him back down. "At ease. You've earned your rest." "Did we win, sir?" Joe asked. Really win? Steve smiled. We did. The enemy is running with their tails between their legs. Your piloting helped make that happen. Joe smiled despite his pain. My family in Minnesota will be proud. The whole world will be proud, Steve assured him. Get some rest. In engineering, Chief Paul Martinez supervised repairs to the quantum displacement generators. The system had nearly burnt out during the battle. Now it needed to be completely rebuilt if they wanted to use it again. Chief, message from the captain, called one of his engineers. He wants to know if we can get the QD system back online. Paul wiped grease from his hands and looked at the damaged equipment. Tell him we can rebuild it, but it will take at least 3 days, and we'll need new parts from the lunar base. The engineer nodded and relayed the message. Paul turned back to his work, thinking about how this technology had changed everything. Just yesterday, the Zekthari had seemed invincible with their superior shields and weapons. Today, humanity had found their weakness. In her quarters, Lieutenant Lisa Chen finally allowed herself to rest after landing her damaged fighter. 6 of her 12 pilots hadn't returned. She knew their sacrifice had helped win the battle, but the loss still hurt deeply. A message notification blinked on her screen. It was from Captain Monroe, commending her squadron for their bravery and skill. Lisa read it twice, then closed her eyes. Images of her parents flashed in her mind. They had died when she was just a teenager, when Shanghai was destroyed. Today, she had finally struck back for them. We did it, she whispered to their memory. We showed them humans aren't weak. On the bridge, Steve met with Dr. Wright to discuss the battle's outcome and what might come next. The tactical display showed the retreating enemy ships as small, red dots moving away from Earth. How long do you think we have before they return? Steve asked. Karen studied the display thoughtfully. Hard to say. Their empire is vast, according to our intelligence. They might send a larger force next time now that they know about our technology. Or they might decide Earth is too costly to attack. Do you think they'll develop a defense against the phase shift weapons? Definitely, Karen said without hesitation. They already started during the battle. We need to improve our technology before they return. Make it harder for them to counter. Steve nodded. I'll make sure you get whatever resources you need. This victory buys us time, but we can't waste it. Their conversation was interrupted as Communications Officer Frank Rodriguez called out, Captain, we're receiving a transmission. It's from the Zekthari. Steve and Karen hurried to the main view screen. Put it through, Steve ordered. The screen flickered, then showed the gray, wrinkled face of High Commander Ruxavan. His usually immaculate uniform was torn and stained. Behind him, the shuttle cockpit was damaged and sparking. Captain Monroe of Earth, Ruxavan said, his voice translated by the ship's computer. You have won this battle. An impressive achievement for such a young species. Steve kept his expression neutral. What do you want, Commander? To deliver a message, Ruxavan answered. I underestimated your kind. The Imperium will not make that mistake again. When we return, it will be with a force that makes this fleet look insignificant. When you return, we'll be ready, Steve responded calmly, and we'll have new surprises waiting. Ruxavan's face twisted in what might have been a smile. Perhaps, but remember this, human. You have revealed your greatest weapon today. The element of surprise is gone. The next battle will not be so easy. With that, the transmission ended. The bridge was quiet for a moment as everyone considered the alien commander's words. He's right about one thing, Dr. Wright said finally. They'll be better prepared next time. Steve looked around at his crew, seeing determination in their faces despite their exhaustion. So will we, Doctor. So will we. Admiral Porter's face appeared on a side screen. Captain Monroe, we've tracked the remaining enemy ships. They're entering some kind of faster-than-light travel beyond Pluto's orbit. They're gone. For now. Thank you, Admiral. The Dauntless will return to Lunar Dock for repairs. As the USS Dauntless turned toward home, Steve looked out at the stars. For 15 years, humanity had lived in fear of the Zekthari, always watching the skies for their return. Today, for the first time, the aliens were the ones retreating in fear. It wouldn't last forever. The Zekthari would return, probably stronger and better prepared. But humanity had proven something important today, not just to the aliens, but to themselves. They could fight back. They could win. Earth had taken its first real step into the galactic community, not as victims but as warriors worthy of respect. 6 months passed since the Great Battle. Earth had changed in that time. Cities once dark with fear now glowed with light and celebration. People walked the streets looking up at the stars with pride instead of fear. On a clear morning in what was once called Washington, D.C., now the capital of the United Earth Alliance, Captain Steve Monroe stood in his dress uniform before a large crowd. Behind him on the stage sat Admiral Ellen Porter, Dr. Karen Wright, and other heroes of the battle. President Maria Gonzalez approached the podium. "Today we honor the brave men and women who defended Earth," President Gonzalez announced. "For 15 years we lived in the shadow of alien threat. Now we stand in the light of human victory." The crowd cheered. Steve looked across the sea of faces, of people from all nations stood together, united by their shared humanity. The Zekthari attack 15 years ago had done what centuries of human history could not. It had united Earth under one banner. "Captain Stephen Monroe," called the president. "Please step forward." Steve moved to the podium. The president pinned a golden medal to his chest, the Star of Earth, the highest honor any soldier could receive. "For extraordinary leadership and courage in the face of overwhelming odds," she announced. Captain Monroe turned the tide of battle and secured humanity's first victory against the Zekthari Imperium. Steve accepted the medal with a nod. "Thank you, Madam President. But this victory belongs to everyone. The brave fighters who flew into enemy ships, the engineers who kept our technology working, and the scientists who gave us the means to fight back. Most importantly, it belongs to those who aren't here today, those who gave their lives so that humanity could survive." After the ceremony, Steve walked through the memorial garden that had been planted to honor those lost in the 15-year conflict with the Zekthari. Trees from every nation on Earth grew here, symbols of life continuing after loss. He stopped at a marble wall where names were carved in neat rows. His finger traced over one name: Susan Monroe. His wife had been on one of the first ships destroyed. During first contact, "We did it, Susan," he whispered. "We showed them humanity isn't weak." A voice spoke behind him. "She would be proud, Captain." Steve turned to see Dr. Karen Wright. She wore a simple blue dress instead of her usual lab coat, but her eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had created the quantum displacement technology. "Are you ready for the next phase?" she asked. Steve nodded. The president approved. "The mission this morning. The USS Dauntless will lead the first human expedition beyond our solar system." Karen smiled. "Not just a defensive force anymore. Now we're explorers too." "Both," Steve corrected. "We need to find allies, other species who might help us against the Zekthari when they return. And we need to learn more about what's out there." They walked together toward the new Earth Defense Headquarters. The building rose like a silver spear toward the sky, a symbol of humanity's new direction. Inside, they joined Admiral Porter in the main planning room. Holographic displays showed the Dauntless, newly rebuilt and improved, orbiting the moon. "The ship is ready," Admiral Porter told them. "We've installed the new version of the QD technology on all major systems. The Zekthari won't find it as easy to counter this time." "And the crew?" Steve asked. "The best Earth has to offer," Porter replied. "Lieutenant Lisa Chen has been promoted to commander. She'll be your second in command. Chief Paul Martinez has agreed to serve as chief engineer again." Steve nodded with approval. Both had proven themselves in the battle. "What about defense? Here?" he asked. "If I'm taking the Dauntless beyond our system, what protects Earth?" Porter pressed a button on the table. The hologram changed to show a fleet of new ships in various stages of construction. "The victory gave us the time we needed," she explained. "These new vessels all carry Dr. Wright's technology. Even if the Zekthari return while you're away, Earth won't be defenseless." Later that day, Steve visited the lunar dock where the Dauntless waited. The ship had been completely rebuilt after the battle. It was larger now, with more advanced weapons and stronger engines. Most importantly, it carried improved versions of the quantum displacement technology. Commander Lisa, Chen met him at the airlock. "Captain on deck," she called, and the crew snapped to attention. "At ease," Steve told them. "How are the preparations coming?" "On schedule, sir," Lisa reported. "All systems are green. The new long-range scanners are installed. We can detect Zekthari ships from twice the distance now." Steve walked the corridors of his ship, greeting crew members and checking on final preparations. In engineering, Chief Martinez was running tests on the new engines. "She's a beauty, Captain," Paul said proudly. 30% more power than before, and the new QD generators have triple redundancy, no more overheating in battle. Steve nodded, with approval. "We'll need every advantage where we're going." The next morning, Earth watched as the USS Dauntless and 2 companion ships prepared to leave orbit. It would be the first human expedition to another star system, a journey that would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier. The battle had accelerated human technology by decades. On the bridge, Steve looked at his crew. They were ready. The fear that had gripped humanity for 15 years was gone, replaced by determination and hope. "Communications, open a channel to Earth Command," he ordered. "Channel open, sir," replied Communications Officer Rodriguez. "Earth Command, this is Captain Monroe. The Dauntless is ready for departure." Admiral Porter's voice came through clearly. "You are cleared for departure, Captain. Your mission is to explore neighboring systems, seek potential allies, and gather intelligence on the Zekthari Empire. Earth will be waiting for your return." "Understood, Admiral. We won't let you down." Steve turned to his helmsman. "Ensign, Miller, take us out. 1/4 power until we clear the moon's orbit." The ship hummed as its engines powered up. On Earth and the lunar colonies, people watched on view screens as the Dauntless moved gracefully away from orbit. "Course laid in for the Alpha Centauri system, sir," reported Miller. Steve nodded. "Engage when ready, Ensign." As the ship accelerated toward the stars, Steve thought about how much had changed. 15 years of fear after first contact. 6 months of celebration after victory. And now, a new chapter was beginning. Humanity's first steps into the wider galaxy. On the tactical display, the solar system grew smaller behind them. Ahead lay the unknown, potential friends, certain enemies, and countless discoveries. The Zekthari would return someday, probably with a larger force. But when they did, they would find a humanity that had grown, learned, and spread beyond a single world. "Captain," called out Dr. Wright from her science station. "I'm detecting unusual energy readings ahead. It might be a natural phenomenon." "Crusade or another ship," Steve finished for her. "Possibly. It's not Zekthari based on our records, it's something new." Steve smiled. This was why they had come, to discover the unknown. "Yellow alert," he ordered. "Slow to half speed. Let's see what's waiting for us out there." The USS Dauntless continued forward, carrying the hopes and dreams of Earth into the stars. Whatever challenges lay ahead, humanity would face them together. They had proven themselves in battle. Now they would prove themselves as explorers, diplomats, and perhaps someday peacekeepers in a galaxy filled with both wonders and dangers. The journey had just begun.